Hello, and welcome to the Retired Epicurean. I'm Chris. Today we move to our second episode in this limited series, and I've got one of my favorite recipes to share with you, an adaptation from the great Louisiana chef Paul Prudhomme. It's a chicken and mushroom risotto, and I hope you like it, so sit back and enjoy the show. Chicken and mushroom risotto, a favorite of everybody's. That's just the way it is. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm Chris. We're going to go over a few of the elements for tonight's recipe, and I certainly hope you enjoy it. Now, of course, if you're going to do a chicken and mushroom risotto, you're going to need some chicken. I like this. This is a boneless, skinless chicken breast. We're not using thighs. In fact, I've never used thighs for this recipe. This one's a little thick, so I'm going to cut it in half. I've already cut this one in half, but this is how you do it. Without cutting your hand off, I'm just going to go ahead and make this a little bit easier because I'm going to want to put these chicken cubes, I want to dice them up is what I'm trying to say. And so that's much nicer to have it that thin, and then just cut them up into nice little dice strips. So cut up a little bit at a time. You can see that's just about a ½ inch. And then we will put these in cubes. This is nice chicken. I did trim off some of the fat that you can see. There's a little bit of that right there. Let's not have that in our dinner, so let's get rid of that right now. And then that's not really attractive, so you're just going to have to do a little bit of maintenance here as you go ahead with your recipe. And that's a goner right there. So then I'm going to continue to do that with the rest of this chicken. And you're going to see when I do have a strip, I'm just going to want a nice dice there, about a ½ inch cube, and that will be fabulous in this chicken and mushroom risotto recipe. That's what we're talking about right there. I sharpened these knives yesterday, and they say that a sharp knife is safer than a dull knife. They also say that about a TV host. See, that fell on the counter, but I cleaned that counter thoroughly before this program. Sure, you could do 2 at a time if you're a skilled person. I just like to be a little bit more careful. And I'm not in a big hurry. So this is a little bit more than a pound of chicken. And I think that you'll find that that will feed all of your family or all of your guests very handily. And it's always been a crowd pleaser whenever I've made this. And then we'll put that aside. But doesn't that look good? Again, a little bit more than a pound. Boneless, skinless chicken breast. Delicious. Now this recipe calls for a ½ pound or 8 ounces of whole mushrooms. They won't be whole for long because I'm going to slice them up to a nice thinness that really is suitable for this chicken and mushroom risotto recipe. Also, let's not take any chances and let's rinse these so that they are nice and clean. Boy, aren't those beautiful? Criminy mushrooms. Now, of course you can buy mushrooms all sliced up, but I want them a certain kind of dimension and thinness. So I go ahead and get the whole mushrooms and then chop them up myself. These criminy mushrooms provide a wonderful flavor for this risotto. I think you'll find that yourself. Now, I had a very close friend of mine ask me to show in cups what 8 ounces of mushrooms look like. And so I'm going to do that. I mean, if you smash it down there, this is a Pyrex measuring cup that has 2 cups capacity, and of course that's that line, so there's a little bit more than that. But that's what it looks like when you put 8 ounces of chopped mushrooms in a 2-cup Pyrex measuring cup. Now, as we've mentioned in previous episodes of the Retired Epicurean, we're going to use freshly grated Parmesan cheese for this recipe. It's wonderful. We've mentioned that before. We will always say it. This grater I bought for about 20 bucks at Sur la Table. I don't know if you can see that. And it's a good grater for me. I really enjoy it. And we're just going to go ahead and grate up about a half a cup of this Stella brand of Parmesan cheese that I got at my local supermarket. And I'm telling you, if you tried the previous episode, the schoolyard spaghetti recipe, if you had a chance to sample it, you know how wonderful this Parmesan cheese is. I recommend it thoroughly. Wonderful. So along with the chicken that we're having and the mushrooms that you've seen me slice up, there are a few other ingredients that make this such a wonderful dish. And we're going to start off with 2 tablespoons of butter. This is regular butter, not margarine, nothing else. And here's the great thing, is if you look on the packaging, you'll see that somebody, and this is brilliant, has put markers to indicate 1 individual tablespoon. So you just cut accordingly. Fabulous idea. Also, you're going to find out we're going to use some black pepper. Of course, we're going to use some salt. Another big item in this is chicken broth. Now this is the family size because you need 6 cups for this recipe. Also, it's low sodium. It can get a little salty for some people's taste, so we're going to go with that. Look at that impressive box. Also, we are going to use arborio. This is an Italian rice, and we're going to use about 1.5 cups of it. Just happens to be about 1.5 cups of that. This is wonderful stuff. This recipe also requires a dry white wine. This is a Chardonnay from Sutter Home, and I like this size. At my local supermarket, you can buy a 4-pack of this for a very reasonable price, and it's good for cooking. We only need 1/2 cup of this at this point, so I'm just going to do that right now. Measure that out, and it's just about 1/2 cup. Look at that. Wonderful. Really helps when you're cooking this risotto recipe. Also, we need 1/2 onion. Now, if you saw the previous episode of the Retired Epicurean, you know we cut 1 onion in half. This is the other half. That's efficient. As I have said before, I like to use a food processor to manage the onions. So I've cut them up into a size that fits this small and very effective food processor. I'm just going to put those in there, and what this does, it helps me avoid tearing up because of the aroma and the gases that the onion produces. And what a treat for you too. I'm actually going to show you using it. I'm going to go to the chop mode, not the pulse mode. How quick is that?
So now that we've seen what goes into the recipe, let's begin the process of cooking.
I can tell you that an efficient use of time is to start the chicken broth on a simmer. That's probably going to be one of the earliest things you do in getting this cooking going. Again, this is 6 cups of low-sodium chicken broth. That's a lot, but amazingly, you will use it all. The arborio Italian rice does soak up all of this and makes it a really nice texture so that you can enjoy it with your guests. And that's all there is to that. So again, we want this to become a simmering batch of chicken broth. So I'm going to start off with a really low heat on this back burner here. And once we get it good and hot and simmering, we will turn it to the simmer mode on the stove. And at this point, I'm going to turn this front burner on to a moderate heat. Something like about that right there. And then I'm going to use the 2 tablespoons of butter and get that just started melting, and then I will add the mushrooms. Yeah, that's a good amount of melting going on there. Now we can go ahead and add the mushrooms. Again, that's a half a pound, 8 ounces, and a little more than 2 cups going in there. Don't those look good? And let's get those browning. This might take about 5 minutes. Now look at those criminy mushrooms browning up. That's getting there pretty good. We're about 4 or 5 minutes into this browning process, and we're about to add the chicken. And I think we can do that right now. Again, the chicken was diced up into small half-inch size pieces, and oh man, that's going to be nice. That's a little more than a pound, and you are going to love this when it's done. Now, along with the chicken, we want to add only a quarter of a tablespoon of the salt. We will save the other 3/4 of a tablespoon for later. But we also want to add all of the pepper at this point. And then stir that in there. And now we're going to go ahead and get the chicken just cooked. We don't want to overcook it. That would be a crime for this recipe. This might take about 3 or 4 minutes. Again, we're at moderate heat. And all the while, I have the chicken broth, 6 cups of chicken broth, simmering on the back burner. And that's just what we want. Now we are well along in the cooking of the chicken, and just want to be careful not to get any pieces that are left raw. We want our guests to go home feeling great about their chicken and mushroom risotto experience. And it's looking pretty good. And so what's going to happen when I'm satisfied that the chicken is just done is I will remove this batch from the heat and set it aside. And it won't be set aside for too long. That's when we start the rice process. And I'm going to turn the heat off now and move it over to another side of the stove. And now you see we're getting a nice simmer going on the broth, which means it's about time to start the rice process. To begin our rice process, I'm going to use a 4.5 quart pot. And what we also need to do is use a little bit of vegetable oil. And just 2 tablespoons ought to do it. And we'll just use a moderate heat to get that vegetable oil going. That looks good right there. I'm going to just heat that up a little bit and then add the onion. And again, this is 1/2 of a yellow onion. I used a food processor to help me make that a perfect consistency. And we're just going to go ahead and get that cooking. We want it to become opaque or translucent. get my wooden spoon going. And you already hear a nice sizzle. That's good. So this process takes about 5 minutes to get the onions translucent, at which point we will add the arboreal rice, and we want that to turn opaque as well. And we are well along in the sautéing of the onions. I believe we can add the arboreal rice at this point. Again, this is about 1.5 cups of the arboreal rice. We want to get that coated with the vegetable oil and onion mix. And this will just be about 2 minutes before it's ready to continue the process. And the arboreal rice is just about ready. And now we will add 1/2 cup of dry white wine. And this will really help the flavor of the risotto. Stir that in there until all of the wine is absorbed. Again, this is over a moderate heat. You want to see what a moderate heat looks like? There you go. We'll get a nice bubble going. Shouldn't take too long for that to become absorbed. So it's been about 4 or 5 minutes and the wine is now absorbed into the rice. That's wonderful. Now we can start with the chicken broth. So I just use this size ladle to transfer the simmering broth into the rice mixture. 1 ladle at a time. That must be about 1/2 cup. And again, like the wine, you just want to let that absorb into the rice, and then once it has, continue with another ladle. And that first ladle of broth is now absorbed quite nicely. Only took 2 or 3 minutes for that to happen. And so then we will repeat that process, 1 ladle at a time, absorbing this. And you will do this a few times, all in all probably about 30 minutes of time for all of the broth to be used and the consistency of the risotto to be perfect. And we'll add another ladle. And now is a good time to add the remaining 3/4 of a tablespoon of salt. Give that a good stir. And you will find that you'll need to stir this quite regularly in order to provide the best consistency for your chicken and mushroom risotto.
So we're well along in the process of cooking the chicken and mushroom risotto. You're going to find it to be a fabulous recipe. So what we're going to do is, once the rice is completely absorbed with the broth, then we will degrease the mushroom and chicken mixture and then add that into the rice mixture. And then also, the real wonderful thing is when you add the Parmesan cheese. And it creates this fabulous paste. And the flavor's incredible, especially with the criminy mushrooms. You're going to love it.
And we're about 10 minutes into the absorption process, broth to the rice mix. And you can start to see the rice has softened up a bit. And we're not at the point where you can actually taste it and test the firmness of the rice. That will be a little bit later. But right now, continue the process. Keep adding those ladles of the wonderful low-sodium chicken broth. We're about 20 minutes into the process of putting the low-sodium chicken broth into the rice mixture. And we're getting there. I've tasted it. It's still firm, and we want our rice to be nice and soft and mushy. So we're going to continue adding broth. And we are just about there. We have just a little bit of broth left, maybe 1 or 2 ladlefuls, but I don't think we need it. I'm going to let this cook just a bit more before we go ahead and move the chicken and mushroom mixture and put it right into this 4.5 quart pot. Any minute now. So I've lowered the heat a little bit on the arborio rice mixture, and now it's time to add the chicken and mushroom. And I'm going to use the slotted spoon that I've used in past episodes, just to get that grease. We don't want that limited amount of grease going into our arborio rice. And so once we have all of this in the rice, we're going to stir it up, make sure it's well blended, and then we're going to heat it through. But before we finish, we will add the Parmesan cheese, and it'll create that consistency that you will remember for years to come. Now that we have the chicken and mushroom in there, we can go ahead and add the 1/2 cup of grated fresh Parmesan cheese and mix that all together. Again, we're on a lower heat at this point. We do want all of this to heat through, and you're going to find it wonderful. At this point, we can say, voila! It's time to present this to your guests.
And one additional tip, grate up a little extra Parmesan cheese and have it ready in case anybody wants to put a little bit more on this already fabulous risotto dinner. Thank you so much for watching today's episode of The Retired Epicurean. We'll see you next time.